What is going on, everybody? Welcome back to Strength Coach Rants. We're here for a new season. I am your host, Connor Lyons, and today I'm going to be giving you all the information you'll need when it comes to picking out a strength coach or personal trainer that's right for you. All right, we're back with this third season of Strength Coach Rants. We've got some new topics, some new things we're going to talk about. The summer's over, so I've got more time to do this kind of thing. Had a very busy summer here at the gym. I am now a father. I had a daughter. She's beautiful. Her name is Charlotte. She's about 4 months old now. So I've had a couple things kind of pulling me in different directions, so I haven't had an opportunity to do this. But here we are with the summer winding up. I'll probably only be on the floor coaching maybe 6 to 8 hours a day instead of like the 10 to 12. So there's a couple more gaps throughout the day where I can do this kind of thing. So I'm going to be doing that. We're going to talk about the things that you need to look for when you're looking for a personal trainer, a strength and conditioning coach, either for yourself or your child. There's a lot of good information in here. There's a lot of things that you need to be on the lookout, some things that really don't matter, some things that should make you want to run, and we're going to talk about all those things today. Now, I understand this is going to look like a giant commercial for my personal services, my gym here at the Lions Den, and it kind of is, but I think not enough people really understand what they're looking for when they're looking for a solid strength coach for their physical preparation for sport, or even just a personal trainer to help you get back into shape. So today we're going to talk about all those things. All right, so we're going to open up here with a couple things that you should really look for and kind of pay attention to when it comes to hiring a personal trainer or a strength and conditioning coach, because there are many strength coaches and personal trainers out there, and not all of them are good, just like everything else. For me, one of the biggest things is an education, and the reason that I think that this is a very big deal is because it shows that you actually cared enough to do it, right? There's way too many people in this field that either sports didn't pan out, or selling phones at the Verizon booth at the mall didn't work out, and they're great at sales, and they're like, I like fitness, I look the part, so maybe I'll go do this. There's a lot of people who don't really understand physical adaptation and preparation. They really just understand, well, I did this and it was, it made me look, however, everything's a hammer, everything's a nail. All they have is a hammer, so everything becomes a nail. I think education's a big deal. It gives you a better understanding of physiological adaptation, but it also shows that you cared enough to have that be something that you're going to do from the offset. That's what you wanted to do. It wasn't like a fallback plan when other things didn't pan out. Now, does that mean you can't be a good coach if you don't have an education? Absolutely not. I know some great strength and conditioning coaches who are coaching at high levels who didn't necessarily get a degree in exercise science, exercise physiology, kinesiology, athletic training, physical education, biology, any of these fields, but they've still done the work to learn and be able to apply what they've learned with their athletes and clientele. So education's a big piece for me. Your previous clientele, very important for me. What are they doing now? How did they do? How long were they with you? Did it end amicably? What do they look like? How long have they been, playing their sport, or what level of sport are they at? Where did they start and where did you get them to? Those things all matter. And, you got to understand too, for every strength coach, even that's in this area, 90% of the clientele that we have won't amount to anything of greatness. They're just, regular kids that are wanting to work out and train hard and get better at their sport. And, so don't think that they have to be training all these phenoms, because chances are the phenoms would have been where they're going to be, whether or not they worked with that coach in the first place. Now, what I will say is if their clientele is consistently hurt all the time, that's a major red flag. If you've got kids that are constantly getting non-contact ACL tears, constantly rolling their ankles, you've got labral tears, you've got all these other things that are from non-contact type injuries that are from either overuse or just inattention to detail in the gym. So that's a big part of like who their clientele is, and that's when it comes to physical preparation for sport. If we're talking about personal training, do their clients look like they're going in the right direction? Did they have a client that started off overweight 6 months ago and is now only slightly less overweight? They don't have to be these amazing transformations where somebody lost like 70 pounds, but do they look like they're trending in the right direction? Do they look like they're having a good time when they're training? Because that's a big part of it. Do they look like they're being put in a position where they can't succeed, right? So giving somebody way more load than they can handle, giving them movements that they can't handle, not scaling things down enough, scaling them way too high. There's a lot of things that somebody's current and past clientele will show you as to like their capabilities of being who you need them to be. Another one's do they have a revolving door of clients? There's a lot of coaches and personal trainers that are amazing salesmen and they are terrible coaches. So they may get somebody like to buy a big package and be there, for, I don't know, let's say 10 sessions or 2 months, and then they're gone. Do you see them constantly selling because they can't keep their books full because people are leaving? That's a big red flag. I remember when I was working at Lifestyle Family Fitness, the best selling personal trainers had to be because they couldn't keep a hold of clientele. And that happens as strength and conditioning coaches in the private sector as well. So, if they have a consistently revolving door of clientele, that'll probably tell you something. Are they at a reputable facility? Now, I'm not saying that personal trainers and strength and conditioning coaches at commercial gyms can't be good, but what I will say is it makes their job a lot harder. When you're in that kind of environment, it is a sales job. It has nothing to do with how good you are at what you do. Can you make the sale? Can you keep the person in the gym? That is what matters to that facility. So being in a commercial gym can be a little bit of a red flag, not to mention the standards for like their hiring practices aren't that high. You could have a weekend cert at a lot of these places. Some of them have, gone a little further down the road where, those weekend certs don't do any good for them anymore. But the average personal trainer at a commercial gym isn't going to be necessarily the best personal trainer and or strength and conditioning coach. They're definitely not going to be the best strength and conditioning coaches 99% of the time. Where have they been before? They may be at a commercial gym right now, but did they spend time at like higher levels? Were they at a great sports performance facility where they worked with great athletes and great coaches and were able to learn, and now just due to circumstance, that's where they are. So where they've been before, have they interned, under great coaches? Have they, worked at different facilities with higher level, like good athletes? Like that matters. Are they certified? This sounds kind of stupid, but there are so many coaches in this field that are not certified, especially on the sports performance side of things. The barrier to entry in this field is not very high. So it doesn't take much for, somebody who is great in sales and like looks the part to just be like, hey, I'm going to be a quote unquote sports performance coach now, and that's what I'm going to do. So, having a certification isn't the end all be all. I know plenty of coaches that are great that aren't certified. I know plenty of coaches that are dummies and are certified, but it shows that they cared enough, and it shows that they have like minimum knowledge to be able to not hurt you and or your kids. So some of the better, certifications to look for if you're looking for a strength and conditioning coach is NSCA, CSCS, and really the CSCCA. Those would, honest to God, those are the only two that hold any water for me. When it comes to personal training, NASM and NSCA, CPT, like certified personal trainer, like those are fine. Those are good enough. They had to read a book and they had to go sit for a test to pass those exams. So, they at least retained enough of the knowledge long enough to be able to pass that test. I think that's okay. This last one is going to go back to something I mentioned earlier. I kind of touched on it when I didn't really mean to. Do they have a big history of non-contact soft tissue stuff? Like you're going to have kids that break arms. You're going to have kids that blow their knees out. You're going to have, like catastrophic type injuries that happen to kids and adult players. But what you want to look out for is the soft tissue stuff. Are they constantly tearing their hamstring? Are they, ACL tear from cutting, ACL tear from landing after a jump, MCL tear after, cutting or landing from a jump? Are they consistently rolling their ankle? Do they have, shoulder issues? Are they consistently having pain in their shoulders, having to sit out, separating their shoulders, which again, like not necessarily a strength coach issue 99% of the time, but it can be if they're like a non-contact athlete like a tennis player, and they're consistently having shoulder, elbow, or wrist pain. That's more than likely an overuse thing that the strength coach is not addressing. So things like that. Make sure that they don't have a clientele that is consistently hurt. There's a guy I worked for years ago, absolute moron. I don't know how he was able to sell his programs to the degree that he was, because every single one of his NFL guys was consistently hurt, missing 4 to 6 weeks a season for stupid, hamstring issues or MCL tears, or, these things that you shouldn't be dealing with as an athlete if you have a good strength coach who's addressing these things in the off season or even during the season. So, biggest things to look out for, right? Do they have an education? I don't think it's the end-all be-all, but I think it's important. Look at their previous clientele. Who are they? Where are they? How long do they stick around? Are they at a reputable facility, or have they ever been in a reputable facility? Where have they been before kind of touches on that. Are they certified? That's a big one, and it doesn't mean that they're great if they are. It just means that they cared enough and they probably won't hurt you. And do they have a big history of the non-contact stuff? Because if they do, that's not somebody that you want to kind of hire to be your coach. Another one that you could touch on here is, do they have a history in the general population of clients having rhabdo? A lot of CrossFit boxes dealt with that for a long time because they hired these dummies with 40, or it wasn't even 48 hours. I think it was like 16 hours over the course of 2 days, certifications, and they don't really understand what they're doing. So if you're in the private sector, are they constantly in pain and not feeling right? If we're talking about strength and conditioning, are their athletes consistently sitting on the sidelines due to some soft tissue stuff that should have been addressed? Those are the biggest things to look out for when you're looking for a personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach. And next, we're going to move on to things that don't matter, that you might think in your head, wow, this is a big deal. This makes this guy matter or gal matter. It means that they're good, and they're not. So we'll kind of talk about that now. All right, so now we're going to move on to the things that don't matter at all. There's a couple things that may, as a consumer, you might think, oh, wow, like they did X, Y, or Z. That means that they're good. In reality, it doesn't necessarily equate to their ability to be good at their job. The first one's going to be a former athlete. Now, I hate this one because there are some former athletes that are very good strength and conditioning coaches. I personally played NCAA hockey. I know some former pro athletes who get into this and are good at it. But the vast majority of former pros or former athletes who, dabble in this field didn't bother to take the time to get an education so they could understand adaptation and all that kind of stuff. So what you end up with is somebody who played sports most of their life. They get done with it, and now they want to stay involved in sport, but they don't really know how, they can't play anymore, and they're not really a coach. So what can I do? Let's get into the fitness side of things, right? And I hate calling it fitness because it's the dumbest word when it comes to sport. They played in the NFL, right? So there's two guys within a stone's throw of this facility. One was a former college football player who ran boot camps and now has a certified personal trainer through NASM, and he is running a department that my buddy used to run at a facility about a mile up the road from here, and it's absolutely infuriating to see that kind of thing happen because this guy doesn't really understand adaptation. He doesn't understand how to achieve these adaptations. He just knows, I played sports, this is what we did, so this is what we're going to do, and it should work for you. And the sad part about that is very early on in training, it will. When you look at, we talked earlier about your previous clientele, look at them 3 to 5 years down the road. That's when you're going to start to see all the nasty aspects of training, in improper manners. That's when you're going to start seeing all that stuff kind of rear its ugly head. And then there's another guy, former NFL player, same deal. He was actually a client of mine at one point, but doesn't really understand. He can move well. He looks the part, but now he's general manager of a very high level facility, and I just shudder to think what's going on with some of those kids training in those in that building, because his NFL clientele had a laundry list of soft tissue stuff that kept them off the field of play, which, in the long run costs them money because their longevity in sports not going to be as much. It costs the team money because, they've got to pay you not to play, and they have to pay somebody else to come in and kind of fill that role that you can't because you're hurt. So former athlete, Not necessarily a good thing, not a bad thing necessarily either. So you just kind of need to do your homework when you're looking into these things. They have a huge social media following. That means absolutely nothing. And I'm not just saying that because our social media following is pretty scarce. It's to be able to create content to deliver to the masses is completely different from being able to be good on the floor as a coach, right? So you've got a couple guys who can do it very well. Eric Cressy is very good with his one-liners on Twitter and stuff like that. And then you've got the Squat University guy who makes good content because it's quick and to the point. And from what I understand, he's a fairly smart guy with a solid clientele list. Then you've got, God, I can't think of his name, man. He's a PhD, is up in Tennessee or Kentucky, I can't remember, but absolute moron. He's got hundreds of thousands of followers, and he just does the most off-the-wall, ridiculous training, and for some reason, people love to watch it, and they think he knows what he's talking about. You could not pay me to send my child to that man. Huge social media following doesn't mean a whole lot. I had a client that I had to hand off to somebody a couple weeks back, just because their schedule wasn't going to work with ours, so I had to do my homework on some coaches in the area. And the coach that I found, no social media presence to speak of, really. He's just a coach. He's a smart guy. He's got an education background in powerlifting, so that's where I sent him. No social media is going to make up for the fact that you can't coach on the floor program. So, it doesn't necessarily mean they're bad. There are plenty of coaches who are great at what they do and have done an amazing job building up their social media, but it doesn't mean a whole lot. Another red flag is tons of certifications, right? So what'll end up happening is you have these coaches that didn't necessarily go to school and get an education, but they think what they lack in education, they can make up for in certification. So if I'm certified in TRX and kettlebells and a personal trainer and a performance enhancement specialist and a corrective exercise specialist, then I'll matter. If I put a bunch of letters after my name, then people will take me more seriously. When in reality, that's collecting certifications is something that I thought I wanted to do when I first got out of the field because I knew nothing. And now that I know a lot more, I realized what an exercise in futility that was. It makes no sense to pay money to a bunch of organizations every year to have letters after your name that mean precisely nothing. So it's a red flag to me because typically what it means is they're covering up some gaping hole in their knowledge base by kind of projecting, oh, look, I've done X, Y, Z, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 certs, so I clearly know what I'm talking about. Now, it doesn't mean that if somebody has a bunch of certs that they're necessarily a bad coach. I was triple certified when I first got in the field. I had my ATC, my CSCS, and then my PES through NASM, which is a joke. But I had 3, but I see some of these guys, I get people wanting to work here that have 6, 7, 8 certs. So it's weird. They either have 0 or they have 10. And it's just, it's not necessarily a bad thing, but it does tend to be something that covers up gaping holes within their knowledge base. So I would say tons of certs are another kind of red flag, or just it's not something that you necessarily want to look for in somebody. And the last one here, things that really don't matter, working with pro athletes right now. So what that means, right, is that somebody thinks that they're knowledgeable enough to send people that matter to, right? So if let's say I'm working with, way back in the day, we used to work with CAA or Creative Artist Agency, geez. We worked with all their baseball guys. This was 2009 till 2014. They trusted us, right? The fact that we were working with those athletes meant that we were probably pretty good at what we did, and we were going to make sure that those guys were ready and weren't going to get hurt. But when we worked with the academy at the facility I was at, we did nothing that we did with them. Their training is very different. Somebody who has a lot of, experience working with professional athletes isn't necessarily going to know what to do with, kids with a training age of 1 or kids with a training age of 5 who are, 16, 15 years old, 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds. But a lot of people think, oh, he worked with this guy, he's got to be really good. In reality, that it doesn't necessarily equate. I use the fact that I worked for USA Hockey, for 2 years with the women's national program, and we won a Four Nations or 2 Four Nations Cup golds, a World IIHF World Championship gold, and an Olympic gold. But like that has no bearing. Like that kind of training is in no way, shape, or form related to the training that I'm going to put the 12-year-old girl hockey player through. It just shows that I was smart enough that somebody had enough faith in me to work with people who mattered. That's all it is. It doesn't mean that they're going to be great. There are also plenty of, I don't know if you guys remember, and I wish I could find the video somewhere, what Jameis Winston was doing back in, I think during COVID, like the training he was doing. He hired some homeless person, it seemed like, to run his training, right? So that guy's working with Jameis Winston, a multi-millionaire professional football quarterback. So you would think, wow, that guy must know what he's doing. No, that guy was a dummy. Not all these athletes hire the best people. They're just like everybody else. They get mesmerized by, amazing facilities and stuff like that. So just because somebody's working with a pro athlete does not mean that they're necessarily going to be the right fit for you. I know we've gone over those. We're going to go over one more kind of series of things here, and these are going to be the things that if you hear, you should run the other way. All right, so these last 2 things are going to be things that if you hear, you kind of want to run in the opposite direction. They're big red flags for me. So the first one, we talked about former athletes before, but this is it kind of takes a little step further. A former athlete that played whatever sport, right? So you're thinking, man, that guy played in the NHL, so he must be great for my son. That guy was an NFL receiver, and so is my kid, so he must know what he's talking about. He can get him to where he needs to be. In reality, that is so far from the truth. The old adage, those who can do and those who can't coach, is absolutely true. And those who can do can't always coach. Wayne Gretzky's probably the best example of this in the history of the world. Quite arguably, a player that dominated his sport, unlike any other athlete has ever dominated a sport, may have been the worst coach in the history of the NHL when he was with the Phoenix Coyotes, right? So just because you played a sport doesn't necessarily mean that you know what you're talking about, and it extra doesn't mean that you know what you're talking about when it comes to physical preparation, which is a whole different thing. What ends up happening with these guys a lot of the time is, this is what I did, so this is what we're going to do. This got me to where I needed to be, so we're going to do this with your kid. In reality, that may be completely totally and utterly inappropriate for that athlete. Mind you, that guy or gal may have gotten to that level of play, right, to the highest levels of play, in spite of what they were doing, right? So it doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be good. I would say 9 times out of 10, or 99% of the time, so more than 9 times out of 10, that athlete that I played this sport, so I am going to be a strength coach just for this sport, is not going to be a very good coach. Just, that's my 2 cents. I would say probably many strength coaches have the same thought process that I do when it comes to that, because it is an undeniable truth that is how those people tend to operate. Sorry, I'm not, it just bothers me because it happens so often. And then the second one you want to really run from is if they specialize in something, right? So you don't want a jack of all trades, king of none. You want a jack of all trades, king of one, right? So somebody who specializes in something is okay, but a lot of times that specialization comes at to the detriment of many other things, right? So if you're going to hire a power lifter to be your strength and conditioning coach for sport, chances are your movement's not going to, it's going to suffer a little bit. You're not going to be the best sprinter or change of direction or jumper, right? Because their niche is strength, which is okay. That's a big part of sport. That's something that you're going to need. But if they specialize in that, then chances are something else is going to suffer, right? So if you've got somebody who's a track coach, right, a sprinting coach, somebody that has coached 100-meter sprinters, and they're now working in the sports performance side of things, chances are you'll accelerate great. But you may not be able to put much force in the ground because they don't really understand strength adaptation. You may not get, much size because their whole thought process is speed, and that's what everything, revolves around. There's a guy locally here in Tampa who calls himself a jump specialist, right? What the hell is that? There's no such thing. That's not a certification. That's not a thing I've ever heard anybody call themselves. But the guy's a former basketball player, so he wants to work, with basketball. So he's made a niche for himself as a quote unquote jump specialist. Meanwhile, again, a guy who played a sport who doesn't really understand adaptation, positioning, and all those things that go into jumping. So he could do, but he can't necessarily coach. Specializing in something isn't bad. I would say I am probably first and foremost a specialist in strength, but I'm also very good at movement because of my background in athletic training. So you could even say one of my specializations is mobility. But you don't want somebody who specializes in one thing and really to the detriment of the others, because again, like we talked earlier, all they have is a hammer, so everything becomes a nail. Like, don't have this, oh, it's strength, right? Or I can't change direction fast enough. Well, we need to work on your speed. No, like you probably got to work on strength, right? There's a lot of things that go into this, and being a specialist, a quote-unquote specialist, isn't necessarily the best thing. So I would tend to run the other direction if there's an athlete who specializes in a sport. Outside of, you've got a couple guys who can do it, right? Like, so Cressy, baseball guy, boom. Gary Roberts, who I'm not like a big fan of, gets like every hockey player, so everybody wants to go there, and that can be maybe a different podcast episode where we talk about some of these individual strength coaches. But yeah, specialize in a sport, or if they specialize in something in the gym or on the field, that's probably a red flag. That's somebody you don't want to work with, because it's going to have a bad effect on everything else. All right, well, I think that's it. First one of season 3, I think we're in. Who knows? Is in the books. Looking forward to doing a lot more of these. I'm going to try to do them every Tuesday like we have in the past. We'll see how long that goes. I may run out of stuff to talk about, or may regurgitate some stuff, or change my mind on some things, and maybe that'll be part of the plan here as we move forward. When you're looking for a personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach, I know this really turned into like a strength and conditioning coach thing, more so than it did a personal trainer thing, but they go kind of hand in hand. You want to look for the same things. I guess I just expanded on some ideas that dealt with strength and conditioning more so than personal training. But, what to look for: education, who their clientele is, how long their clientele stick around, what happens to their clientele, where have they been before? Have they worked with some, reputable facilities or with some reputable coaches? Are they at a reputable facility, or a facility that's known for like people getting hurt? And do they have a big history, not of being, having athletes hurt in the gym, but having them hurt on the field of play? Things that don't matter. If you're a former athlete, again, we talked about that's kind of a red flag. A huge social media following, again, like, it's not necessarily bad, right? But it really doesn't matter in the grand scheme of things. Tons of certifications, kind of like a little bit of a red flag for me. It means that you more than likely got a little bit of hole in your knowledge base. You're trying to cover that up. Working with pro athletes, again, not a bad thing, right? Because good strength coaches work with the top level guys and gals. So working with pro athletes isn't a bad thing, but it's not like a reason to hire somebody to work with your kid or yourself. Things to kind of run in the other direction from the big red flags. Do they specialize in a sport, right? If they specialize in anything on the field of play or in the gym, those are the things that you don't want to deal with, because again, all they have is a hammer, so everything becomes a nail. I think that's a third time I've said that today, but it's absolutely true. You want somebody who's well versed in the vast majority of the things that you're going to need to get better at, and somebody who is a jump specialist or a sprint specialist or a strength specialist, right, isn't necessarily going to be the best fit for you, because you need strength, speed, power, mobility, agility, resiliency. You need a lot of things that are going to be more than just that one. So I think that's all I got for you today. Thanks for listening. We'll be back again next week. Hopefully you guys all have a good rest of your week and weekend, and we'll see you next time.